Every dog has its day. Bottom line. And Israel is not exempt from this law. In fact, Jesus even warned the Israelites about this. The Israelites said, "We have Abraham as our father. We will be saved." And what does St. John tell them in the Gospel of Matthew? St. John tells the religious establishment, he says to the Jewish priests, he says, "And do not think that you will be saved because you are sons of Abraham. For I tell you now that God can make sons of Abraham out of these very stones." It's such a, man, it gives me almost a funny feeling in my stomach just to think about it. But every dog has its day. Every dog has its day. And I'll tell you guys one last thing about this. I find this to be fascinating. But Israel ancient Israel had a peak of fame, right? They were at a peak of power, and Israel had all this territory, and they were a regional superpower in the Near East in ancient times. What happened before Israel became a country in ancient times? Well, Israel started out as patriarchs. You had patriarchs. You had Jacob, and you had the 12 sons, and they would be the patriarchs for the 12 tribes. One of the patriarchs was who? It was Levi. It was Levi. And Levi was a very, very cruel man. And he was the son of Jacob. Levi and Simeon were very, very cruel. And there was another nation that was living amongst them. They were called the Shechemites. The Shechemites, or the people of Shechem, were Canaanites. And one day, the prince of the Shechemites, he had sex with the sister of Levi. And Levi and Simeon were very upset by this. And so, to prevent bloodshed, Jacob meets up with the prince and his father. And the prince is in love with Dinah, the sister of Levi. And Jacob says, "Okay, well, listen, my sons are angry with you right now, so let's make a deal. You and your people will convert to our religion. You will convert to Judaism." And the son, the prince of the Shechemites, he was so happy about this that he said, "Deal." He was so in love with Dinah, the daughter of Jacob. He said, deal. I'll convert. Not only that, but all of my people, all of my countrymen will convert to your religion. Deal. So they agreed, and the prince got circumcised, and all of his people got circumcised. And what was this, right? This was a new nation being grafted, or about to be grafted in with Israel. This was a new nation about to become Israel, about to become a part of Israel. And the sons of Jacob, Simeon and Levi, they said, "Well, are we really going to allow for these foreigners to inherit our inheritance? Surely no." And what did Levi and Simeon do? They waited for the Shechemites to be circumcised, and they knew that after they get circumcised, they're going to be greatly fatigued and exhausted, and they will be unable to defend themselves. And so after these people got circumcised, Levi and Simeon went into their city and proceeded to butcher all of the Shechemites. And Jacob was so upset, he said, "You have shed blood. What are you doing? Why did you do this? We were about to make peace, and we were about to become one nation, and you murdered these people." And so before Jacob died, Jacob was on his deathbed. This is in the book of Genesis. It's one of the most fascinating stories in the whole Bible. Jacob is on his deathbed, and he looks at Judah, and he says, "Judah, you will be like a great lion." Why? Because Jesus came from the line of Judah. The Messiah came from the line of Judah. And Jacob looks at Simeon and Levi, and he says, "Because you guys have shed innocent blood, your generation will be cursed." And he tells Levi and Simeon, he said, "Your descendants will be scattered. No more. Done." What? Our generation will be scattered? Yes, because you guys are cruel and you shed innocent blood and you murdered those people, so fuck off. Well, what happened? God has a sense of humor. God has a sense of humor. God appointed the descendants of Levi to be the priests. So the line that was cursed was chosen to be the priest, the priestly line, the Levites, the Levitical line. And so for a very, very long time, the sons of Levi, the descendants of Levi, the posterity of Levi were the priests. Fast forward to the Roman Empire. Here comes Jesus. And he sees these priests, these sons of Levi, and he sees how they get invited to the most lavish parties, and he sees how they get the best spots in the feasts. He sees how people make way for them when they see them coming. They make a path for them. Oh, the priests are coming. Make way for the priest. They're on top of the world. The sons of Levi are on top of the world. The people who were told, your generation will be scattered. The people who were told, your line is cursed because of what Levi did. They are on top of the world in Israel. Everybody worships them. They're running the temple. The Roman Empire respects them. Yes, the Roman Empire respects them. The Roman Empire does diplomacy with them because they're so powerful. And here comes Jesus. And Jesus goes to the sons of Levi. And he tells them a parable. He says, there is a man who runs a vineyard. He has a vineyard. And he rents the vineyard to some tenants. And he sends his servant to go to the vineyard to harvest some grapes. And the evil tenants murder the servant. Or they beat the servant up. They take the servant and beat him up. So then the master of the vineyard sends another servant. And they beat up that servant. And then he sends him another servant. They beat that guy up. So the master of the vineyard says, you know what? I'm going to send them my son. Surely they will not lay a hand on my son. And the tenants grab this man's son and they murder him. And Jesus says, and what does the master do to the evil tenants? He destroys them all. And the New Testament tells us that when the high priests, when the sons of Levi heard that, they wanted to kill Jesus because they knew that Jesus was talking about them. So what was happening? It's all very, very profound. Very sublime and profound stuff. Here's what was happening. Levi murdered the Shechemites because Levi did not want foreigners to become grafted in with Israel. He wanted to keep Israel Jewish. He didn't want Gentiles to become a part of Israel. Abraham received bread and wine from who? Melchizedek. And Melchizedek was a Canaanite king. He was not Jewish. He was not an Israelite. He was not a Hebrew. He was a Canaanite. And he gave bread and wine. So Abraham goes to war, he saves Lot, and he meets with the high priest of Jerusalem. Because Jerusalem was Jerusalem. Jerusalem existed before the Jews controlled it. It was already a Canaanite city. Abraham meets up with Melchizedek, the high priest of Jerusalem, and Melchizedek gives Abraham the bread and the wine. That was a foreshadower of what? The communion. Levi murders Canaanites. So Abraham receives the communion from a Canaanite. Levi murders the Canaanites, the people of Melchizedek, because he didn't want those people to be a part of Israel. Fast forward to the death of Jacob. Jacob is on his deathbed and he says, Levi, your line is cursed and you will be scattered. What? Me? Yep, your line will be scattered. But God has a sense of humor. He says, I will choose that line to be the line of the priesthood. Because eventually, the priesthood of Melchizedek will rise up and replace them. The priesthood of a Canaanite will rise up and replace them. Because what does St. Paul say about the priesthood of Jesus? He says Jesus was not of the priesthood of Levi. He was of the priesthood of Melchizedek, a Canaanite, a member of the race that Levi did not want to be a part of Israel. And so the Levites were on top of the world. And what school of thought dominated the Levites in the time of Christ? It was the school of thought of Shammai. Shammai was a Jewish leader who was very popular in Israel before the coming of Christ. And Shechemites did not want foreigners to join the temple, just as Levi did not want foreigners to be grafted in with Israel. And Shechemites was one of the heads of the Sanhedrin. So here comes Jesus, and he says, what happens to the wicked tenants? They will be destroyed. He was speaking of who? The Levites. And it says, when the Levites, when the priests, Levites, when the sons of Levi heard what Jesus had to say, they wanted to kill him because they knew that he was talking about them. So what was happening? What was happening was Jesus came along and he said, do you guys remember that curse that Jacob declared to your patriarch Levi? That curse that said that you guys will be scattered? You guys forgot about that curse because you guys are on top of the world and you're so happy with your domination that you guys aren't even thinking about what Jacob said on his deathbed to your patriarch. Well, I'm here to remind you that your days are numbered. Your end is nigh. So they wanted to kill him because they wanted to preserve their power. They wanted to preserve the power of Levi, the power of Levi's descendants. And so what was happening? What was happening was a war, a spiritual war between the school of Levi, the priesthood of Levi, and the priesthood of Melchizedek. The priesthood of the Judeans and the priesthood of a Canaanite. The priesthood of Melchizedek, who was a member of the same race that Levi murdered. And so Jesus comes along and he says, you guys are following Shechemites. He doesn't want foreigners to enter Israel. He doesn't want foreigners to be a part of Israel because for you guys, Israel is about blood. And that's why St. John of Damascus, St. John the Baptist told the priests, he told the sons of Levi, don't think that you guys are going to be saved because you have Abraham as your father. In other words, do not believe that you will be saved because of your race, because of your bloodline. Because I tell you now that God can make these very stones into sons of Abraham. What was the message? The message was Israel is not a race. Israel is a spiritual condition. And this is why St. Paul says in his letter to the Hebrews, we follow the Jerusalem up on high. And the evangelicals want you to think that we have to follow fleshy Jerusalem. And so Jesus goes into the temple, and what does he see? The court of the Gentiles is being used as a place to sell merchandise. Why? Why were they using the place where the Gentiles were allowed to go and pray as a place to sell merchandise? Why? Because they didn't give a damn about foreigners. They didn't. They didn't care about foreigners. They didn't like it when foreigners wanted to convert to their religion, just as Levi did not want the Shechemites to convert to Judaism. And so Jesus does what? He takes up a whip and he pushes the merchants out and he says, you guys have prostituted my father's house. Zeal hath eateth me up. Zeal hath eateth me up. My father's house was built to be a house of prayer for all nations, not just one nation. And that is why racism and Christianity are utterly and completely antithetical. And anyone who tells you otherwise is a fucking liar. And that's the bottom line. And so there was a curse that was put on the Levitical priesthood. And Jesus came along and said, I'm here to remind you, your days are numbered. Your end is nigh. So what happened? The sons of Levi got together and they said, we got to kill this guy. What happened? Lazarus dies. Oh, this is amazing. Lazarus dies, right? And Jesus comes along and Lazarus's friends are saying, Jesus, please come and cure Lazarus, etc. Jesus comes too late. Lazarus is dead. And they said, oh, Lazarus's body is already stinking. And Jesus said, open up the tomb. He said, open up the tomb. And he said, Lazarus, wake up. And Lazarus wakes up. What does the gospel say? It says, and the chief priests were there. The sons of Levi. The sons of the one who murdered Canaanites because he did not want foreigners to be a part of Israel. his children were now witnessing Lazarus being brought back from the dead. And instead of celebrating, the sons of Levi say, nah, this isn't good. This guy is going to replace us. The priesthood, the man who was of the priest of Melchizedek, this guy who loves foreigners, he's going to replace us. We can't have that. So what does the New Testament say? It says, and the chief priests not only wanted to kill Jesus, but they wanted to kill Lazarus. So they basically said, Jesus has brought Lazarus out of the tomb. We got to put him back in there. Because why? Because they noticed Jews were beginning to follow Christ. What was happening? It's a spiritual war. What was happening was people began to what? Leave the sons of Levi and go over to the priesthood of Melchizedek, the priesthood of a Canaanite. And there was that war. There was that war between the priesthood of a Canaanite and the priesthood of a Levite, the priesthood of Levi. It was a priesthood that hated foreigners versus the ultimate priesthood that embraced all of humanity. That's what it was. And so what happened? They murder Christ. They have him murdered, right? They have him crucified. They frame him. They say he's a terrorist and he's a revolutionary. He's going to destroy the temple. And so they have him murdered. And then what happens 40 years later? The Levites were still around, right? Think about it. 40 years is a long time. I don't care what anyone says. 40 years is a long time. So they kill Christ and they say, that's the end of that. They kill some of his followers. They killed James. Yeah, we got rid of them. No big deal. 40 years have passed. Imagine 40 years, right? 40 years ago. What was that? 40 years ago was 1980 something. It's a long time ago. The Karate Kid came out a long time ago. 40 years. So imagine in that time frame, they have already forgotten about Jesus. They're like, oh, that guy, yeah, we killed him. Yeah, he was a criminal. Who cares? They forgot about him. And they forgot about what Jesus told them about what? The wicked tenants who murdered the son of the owner of the vineyard. And what does Jesus say? He says, the wicked tenants will be destroyed. They forgot all about that. Who cares? Jacob on his deathbed saying, Levi, because you're a murderer, your descendants will be scattered. They forgot. They don't care about any of that stuff. All they care about is their power. So what happens? 40 years later, war. And a Levite priest by the name of Hananiah says, this is amazing. No foreigners can do sacrifices in the temple. Again, anti-foreigner. Just like Levi, their ancestor. Hatred of foreigners. And the Romans hear that and they say, wait, no foreigners can do sacrifices? No foreigners, including the Caesar? Especially the Caesar. That's a declaration of war. Boom, war is declared. Roman-Jewish war sparks. And then what happens? The temple is destroyed. And Josephus has this very profound story that he recounts. He says, the temple was destroyed. It was engulfed in flames. And in the midst of all the flames and all the chaos, there is the Roman general who would become the Caesar. And Josephus refers to him as the Caesar. And you have these priests, the high priests of the temple. These are the Levites, the descendants of Levi. And so then what happens? They beg, they go before the Caesar, they get on their knees, and they beg for their lives. It's prophetic. Here they are begging for their lives from who? A foreigner. The one that they said had no right to do a sacrifice in the temple, now they're begging for their lives. Now they're begging this person, this foreigner, for their lives. And what does Caesar tell them? He says, your temple is gone, therefore of what good is your priesthood? Of what good is your priesthood? And it went right back to exactly what Jacob said, your descendants will be scattered. And it went right back exactly to what Jesus said, the wicked tenants will be destroyed. And Caesar slaughtered the priests who were begging for their lives right there. And that was the end. That marked the end of the Levitical priesthood. Gone. And what dominated? Who took over Europe? What took over Europe? What led Christendom? What formed Christendom? The priesthood of Melchizedek, a Canaanite, and the foreigner won. End of story.